community, which, hopefully over the next month or two, that combined with people who've already had COVID-19 infections, hopefully we will get closer to herd immunity, and that's really the only way I think that we are going to stop not only this spread, but stop some of the mutations that we've been seeing that are serious concerns. Hard to know why there are some specific pockets like Michigan that are seeing a bit of an upsurge. Part of it probably is temperature, meaning we think as the season gets a little warmer, there's a little less viral activity. But I think overall we've made good progress. There's still some vaccine hesitancy. I'm not sure in Michigan if that's related as well as the weather. But I think we still have some concerns, although I think there is starting to be light at the end of the tunnel.
So Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan has asked and called for Michiganders to suspend social activities voluntarily for 2 weeks. She's also asked the federal government to prioritize additional vaccines to the state to help stop the spread of COVID there. Are those the right moves? Because there isn't really general scientific consensus on this, because even if more vaccines were to get there, the period of time it takes for the vaccines to start working, wouldn't the virus just sort of do what it does naturally in that period of time?
Yes, you're exactly right. I think there is a multitude of reasons to really vaccinate as many people as possible. I think we're seeing overall, despite a few concerns here and there, very high vaccine safety and very high vaccine efficacy, and now we're really broadening out the ages and availability, which I think is important because young people certainly can be a reservoir, relatively asymptomatic. So I think that is important. And you're exactly right. Even though you close down for 2 weeks, even if you started vaccinating everyone, it takes really at least 2 weeks to begin to get some antibody response. And we do certainly know patients who get COVID in between their first and second shots. So I think it's helpful. I think one could argue how helpful it would be really to do just a 2-week shutdown, and you always have to weigh that against economic fallout and consequences. But I think getting more vaccine and getting it into people's arms will certainly make a positive impact over the long term. Over the short term, you're right. It may not make a significant impact.
Hey, Dr. Losbader, I'm curious how concerned you are about the concerns about AstraZeneca's vaccine, France pulling that vaccine as a second shot for those under 55 who've already had their first dose. And then the EU, their drug regulator has started a review to assess blood clots in people who received J&J's COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, the message has been we're going to need multiple vaccines to get over this. So when you see those kinds of stories, how troubling do you find them?
Somewhat troubling, but not very troubling. Basically, we do know all of the vaccines are quite efficacious and have a low, not zero, but a low overall incidence of side effects. I think they really need to do more due diligence and find out if those clots really are related to the vaccine. When you're vaccinating millions or hundreds of millions of people, you can always correlate deaths or neurologic issues or clots. I mean, this happens in large populations. The real question is, can we tie it specifically to the vaccine or not? And I think we need to wait for that data. And it probably is reasonable to take a little bit of a pause while you're clarifying that. But certainly the other vaccines, the Pfizer-Moderna vaccine, generally are available. We've not seen any significant problems with those. I would be a little surprised to really believe or see data with clotting because they use kind of an old-fashioned technique of this viral vector where you have this benign virus that introduces the important part of the spike protein to generate antibodies, and that's worked in the past without any significant complications. So I think it's a concern. I agree, maybe taking a pause. It's a risk benefit versus having other people not be vaccinated. But I think it is reasonable to look into that, although I'm skeptical that will pan out.
Hey, just quickly, 30 seconds, and then we'll come back and talk some more. But Pfizer today, just about an hour or so ago, they're looking for U.S. approval to expand the vaccine for emergency use authorization. We're talking about for adolescents now. That's a big step forward, potentially.
Oh yeah, huge. I think it's important. Look, we've been giving kids vaccines, even hepatitis B vaccine. You can't start kindergarten. So this sort of vaccine fear in young people, I think, is not really well founded. Obviously, we don't have years of data, but I think it is reasonable, and I think there are complications, some complications, rarely with young people. So I support the 12 to 15. Basically, if we vaccinate a large group, we will decrease mutations and overall get to herd immunity.
Right, as simple as that. Hey, sit tight. We're going to come back to Dr. Ian Lusbader, clinical professor of medicine at NYU Langone, continuing talking about the vaccine. But I also want to talk to him about Wall Street stress, Tim, because we've had a lot of stories about that.
We have. Yeah, it seems like every bank giving more money to associates as a result of this.
Even a day off occasionally.
Yeah.
This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 1061 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. It's Friday. It's Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic. We're going to get back to Dr. Ian Lustbader over at NYU Langone Medical Center. Got to talk about variance. Got to talk about the wealthiest countries versus those that are not.
Yeah, that and also stress. I mean, Dr. Lustbader.
Yes.
Love talking to him all about the way that how we're going to get out of this, not just from a health perspective, physical health, but from a mental health perspective as well.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we'll get to him in just a second. Let's get back to Charlie Pellet. Check on your top business stories in the trading day. Hey, Charlie.
Indeed, got to talk about records. Let's begin with the Dow up 134 right now, up 0.4%. YTD up by 9.9%. We've got the S&P at a record up 12 today, higher by 0.3%. For the year to date, it is up by 9.4%. NASDAQ up now by 4 points, holding on to a gain up by less than 0.1%. 10-year yield 1.66%, down 12.30 seconds. Stocks at records as investors shrug off concern over inflation. They're focused on prospects for an economic rebound. Retailers, tech, and industrial shares driving the advance in the S&P 500. Gold down $13 the ounce. Gold dropping 0.8%, $17.42. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, $59.32 a barrel on West Texas Intermediate crude. Pfizer and its partner BioNTech say they'll be asking regulators in the U.S. and elsewhere to allow use of their COVID-19 vaccine in adolescents ages 12 to 15. Pfizer shares up now by 1.4%, a surge for BioNTech up now by 6.2%. Almost 110 million people, roughly 33% of the U.S. population, have now received at least one dose of a coronavirus vaccine, according to the CDC. Some 64 million people, 19% of the population, have completed their vaccination. Dr. Andrew Pekosh is a professor of molecular microbiology and immunology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
While it's difficult to predict anything with this pandemic, the signs right now are that the vaccines are working. The vaccines, in the worst case scenario, may easily be updated to keep up with the virus. And so I think we're in a situation where we can get this under control and really limit the severe disease that is caused by SARS-CoV-2 and deal with case numbers in a way that's similar to seasonal influenza.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Again, checking some of the vaccine names that we track. Repeating on Pfizer, up 1.4%. BioNTech, up 6.2%. AstraZeneca, the ADR, is up 0.6%. Moderna is surging 6.5%. Johnson & Johnson, down day there, dropping 1.6%. Recapping equities higher, S&P, Dow, both at records. S&P up by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks. Let's get back to Dr. Ian Lustbader, clinical professor of medicine at NYU Langone, on the phone with us still in New York City. Ian, I kind of want to do a town hall with you because I got a couple of quick questions, and then I want to move on to stress in Wall Street. But question is, can you mix and match COVID vaccines?
We don't really know, but we think you can, and there may be some benefit to that. We're not in that position yet, but certainly for other countries that hopefully we'll cooperate with who need extra vaccine if we wind up having extra. If they've had one, it's probably very reasonable to give a second dose of another vaccine. Hasn't been well studied, but theoretically fine and probably will work out very well.
All right, second question. Researchers identifying 5 new cases of double mutant COVID variants in California. I feel like I'm watching a crazy movie. What does that mean?
That is concerning, and this double mutant variant has been seen in India extensively. It certainly means if we're seeing 5 or more cases here, there are probably a lot more that are not found. The problem with not reaching herd immunity quickly is that you get variants, and the more the virus replicates, the more mutations, and these mutations are more aggressive, easier to spread, and maybe somewhat resistant to the vaccine. So this is something that needs to be watched. Potentially is quite a concern, and hopefully more cases will not be found, but this could be a real problem.
Okay, another one for the lightning round. What happens if you don't know that you have COVID, like you're asymptomatic, and you get a shot for the vaccine? Do we know what happens?
Probably not much. It may not be as effective, or you may have more side effects such as some fever or chills. There's certainly no danger to it, and it probably will just boost your own immune response, which is fine.
All right, last lightning round. Wealthiest countries getting the vaccine and vaccinated faster. You know, we keep talking with people about the concerns about that. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it would be great if life were fair, and it would be everyone wants to feel in control. Humans like to feel. They hate change. They love to be in control, and this pandemic has certainly disturbed that. I think it's reasonable for the countries that have developed the vaccine and funded it, you know, to get it. But unless we really do share extra, for example, with Mexico and to our southern border, that really has very little vaccine and around the world, all we're going to do is prolong the infection for everyone. So I think it's in everyone's interest to collaborate and share, but I do think it's reasonable for the countries that have paid for it, you know, to get it first, but certainly not to hoard it.
Okay, didn't mean to stress you out with that. But speaking...
No, not at all.
You're so good. But speaking of stress, Wall Street, we feel like all of a sudden we've seen a flurry of stories. Royal Bank of Canada and Toronto Dominion Bank, they're giving employees an extra paid day off this year as the pandemic is showing signs of worsening in Canada. I mean, there are concerns about strength. You know, early first-time junior investment bankers, you know, telling that, you know, the firms are saying you don't have to work on the weekend. Wall Street stress. Do you feel like companies and the world is thinking differently about how stress impacts us as workers?
I think so. I think companies are thinking a bit differently. They're hopefully thinking more about their employees. This has been a very stressful time. There are documented increased stress, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, fatigue. You know, humans don't like change. They don't like to be vulnerable. We do a lot of things to pretend we're not vulnerable, even though we are. And I think it's reasonable for companies to make some accommodation. On the other hand, people have to sort of step up and say, you know, life is challenging. Let's help each other. Let's collaborate. Let's be nurturing to each other if we can. But stress comes along, and there will be other problems along the way. And I think we have to, you know, accommodate, but not make people assume that life is going to be easy.
Dr. Lustbader, we only have 30 seconds left for this, but, you know, just leave us with a little tip to help us de-stress for the weekend if people are starting to feel burned out getting to 14 months into this pandemic.
100%. One, I think people should feel encouraged that we're getting closer to herd immunity. Nurture yourself, socialize. Very important to socialize, either with distance outside 6 feet. Exercise. The weather's getting nicer. Take your vitamin D. And I think there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we do have to hang in there a little bit longer.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah, I like to end on that.
Oh, good idea and good advice. Ian, thank you so much. Dr. Ian Lustbader, clinical professor of medicine at NYU Langone, on the phone in New York City. I have to say, as it's gotten warmer, Tim, that has given me some optimism.
Yeah, you know what's been great is just going on walks after work or later at night when it's like not too cold out. It has helped so much.
Feels so good.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get a check on world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. The trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is focusing on the medical cause of death of George Floyd. Forensic pathologist Dr. Lindsay Thomas says it is clear to her after reviewing the autopsy and watching the video of the arrest that the officer's knee on Floyd's neck is what killed him.
This is not a sudden cardiac death, a sudden cardiac arrhythmia. This is a death where both the heart and lungs stopped working. And the point is that it's due to law enforcement subdual, restraint, and compression.
Thomas's testimony bolsters accounts of other experts who have rejected the defense theory that Floyd's drug use and underlying health problems killed him. Under pressure to address the imbalance on the Supreme Court, President Biden is signing an executive order to create a study of adding seats to the High Court. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the makeup of the commission will be diverse.
The makeup of this commission, which was vital for the president, there are progressives on the court, there are conservatives on the court. People will present different opinions and different points of view, and then they'll have a report at the end of 180 days.
Psaki says in addition to the size of the court, they'll look at the length of service for justices and the existing court rules. Activists have been pushing for more seats on the court after former President Trump appointed 3 justices, including one to a seat that Republicans had blocked former President Obama from filling for almost a year. The current court has a conservative 6-3 tilt. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, Carol, you have probably seen in the last couple of days these images on Twitter, on social, of the Super Mask. It's a $300 mask. It looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. It's a collaboration between will.i.am and Honeywell. And earlier today, I spoke with will.i.am, the rapper, about collaborating with Honeywell to create that mask. In this excerpt, he explains why masks will continue to be part of our lives even after we're all vaccinated.
So the vaccination lasts ? And like the flu, it's not the cure for COVID, just like there's no cure for the flu. But every year we have to take a flu shot. But this year, less people got the flu because we all wore masks and we all sanitized. So learning from COVID is how we will, curb the next epidemic, because, we never know. But being safe and practicing safety and precaution is how we will make sure that it's less likely to happen.
So it's about the next pandemic and preventing the next pandemic and keeping us safe even after we're all vaccinated. will.i.am saying, hey, masks are here to stay.
I got to tell you, the backstory on this one, the involvement of Mark Benioff over at Salesforce, seeing will.i.am at an MTV Video Music Awards, I think it was last summer, seeing some contraption that he was wearing and being like, what's up with that? And then let me introduce you to somebody I know over at Honeywell. It's really kind of fascinating how this came to be.
Yeah, it really is. And one thing that I wanted to hear from will.i.am, and you can check out the full interview. It's airing during our 5 p.m. show, Bloomberg.com/QT. I wanted to hear what it was like to be an artist over the last year. Everyone has been away from people.
Yeah.
And he's someone who has collaborated for years with incredible musicians, incredible artists. And I got to tell you, Carol, he told me that he has been the most creative ever during this past year. And he's really focused on his own health, like exercising, walking, really watching what comes into his body. It's really interesting.
Listen, it's something we're all going to have to learn how to kind of take with us as we get back to kind of normal life and the stresses that come along with it. Anyway, check out Tim's interview on Quick Take. This is Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are at records, best level of the day right now on the Dow, the S&P. We have got the S&P up 12, a gain of 0.3%. Investors shrugging off concern over inflation. They're focusing on prospects for an economic rebound. Stocks are heading for their third straight weekly gain. The Dow up 149 points now, up by about 0.4%. NASDAQ is up 9. That is a gain of 0.1%. 10-year yield, 1.66%. 10-year down 12.30 seconds. Gold is down $12.80 the ounce at $17.43, a drop of 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 59.34 a barrel. Recapping, stocks are at records with the S&P up 13, up by 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, there's a story in the magazine this week. It's about the big pharmaceutical company that was out in front in the race for a vaccine, Tim, until it wasn't.
That company is AstraZeneca. Joel Weber is the editor of Bloomberg Business Week. Excuse me, Joel. He joins us on the remote from Brooklyn. Jeremy Keene is the futures editor at Bloomberg Business Week, and he joins us on the phone from Turkey. Joel, what happened with AstraZeneca?
Well, it is one of the most interesting stories, I think, in the pandemic, because there was this collaboration between Oxford University and Astra. At the start, it really looked like it was going to be the first vaccine out of the gate that people would be able to use, and the beauty of this particular vaccine, of course, is that it is really cheap to make and does not require refrigeration. And so from the get-go, it was viewed as this great hope because it would be basically the world's vaccine. As the trials went along, though, AstraZeneca started to have some unforced errors, and that's led to where we are now, which is that the company has been sort of mired in confusion and hesitancy. And the ultimate risk here is that a vaccine that does look to be effective, and there has been recent news about some concerns about clots that should be taken seriously, but the pluses continue to outweigh the minuses. Yet we could end up prolonging the pandemic because of the hesitancy around the vaccine. So Jeremy was the guiding editor on this story. Jeremy, I'm just curious to you, as you got into this, like there's been so many stories about Astra over the past several months, and like I think this was the best read that pulled it all together. And I'm curious to you, like what were the things that really stood out to you as you were editing the story?
I think, for me, Joel, it was the sense almost of I hesitate to use the word tragedy because, this is still a good vaccine. The efficacy results have been pretty good, have been very good, I would say, in the mid 70s, and the clotting is something that governments are clearly taking very seriously. But it becomes hard to kind of separate what, the story of the vaccine from the cauldron of the pandemic and all the things that, they were doing as the front that were really, they were trying to do something under immense pressure. The world was, shutting down. Everybody, people were dying really quickly. And this company, in partnership with, with the University of Oxford, they set terms that were designed to have the vaccine be not-for-profit. There were so many good intentions that went into it. And, it's true that they had a lot of unforced errors, but even some of those unforced errors are difficult to separate in a way from, just from the way that things are perceived during a pandemic versus the way that they might have been perceived outside that context. Like those trials were so closely watched and yeah.
Hey, well, Jonathan, how much of it was, Jeremy, excuse me, how much of it was that this was it was a partnership. It was kind of complicated. I mean, Oxford was, I think starting their trials, at least according to the story, when Astra came in, so it was kind of a complicated relationship, I feel like, from the get-go. And also, this is the first vaccine, right, that Astra has done.
That's correct. They had a flu treatment, I believe, that was pretty much the only thing that they'd really done in that area. And they definitely had a very good reputation heading in under their CEO. They'd really gotten a good reputation for putting drugs, particularly cancer drugs, getting new treatments on the market. But when they came in, like Oxford had already been working on this. They'd already begun plans for UK and Brazil and South African trials. So they took over that part of it. And then, Astra said, okay, well, we'll work out the US trial. And so, right at the very beginning, there wasn't, one trial protocol that was going on everywhere. And, that makes it a little harder to kind of explain what you're doing and to keep track of things and to tell your story tell the story of what your vaccine can do to the public.
Well, speaking of that, what is the potential consequence of these blunders over the past few months from AstraZeneca when it comes to the global rollout here? Because this was supposed to be a vaccine that was really supposed to help prevent COVID in many people around the world, because it's so much easier to transport than the mRNA shots from Pfizer and Moderna. Joel, take it away.
And go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, I was just going to say quickly that, and to be clear, it's still doing that in places. But the consequences, of course, are, especially with the report that just a couple of days ago, the European regulatory agency, the British regulatory agency, is going to come out and discuss a possible link between the vaccine and these blood clots. And we're talking about an incidence, I believe it's 4 in every million was the figure that the UK, if I'm not mistaken, came up with. And, so that you can talk about where that lies on the continuum of risk, but all these people are also still saying, like, the benefits of taking it far outweigh the risks, especially in the elderly, where the incidence of clotting seems to be lower, and also because the risk of what happens if you catch COVID is so much higher. So, that's all still, that part is still true. Like, they still want to be getting this vaccine out there into the world. But there's also the problem, of course, of hesitancy. One thing that's discussed sort of toward the end of the piece is that you have people coming out and saying this is partly a public relations problem, because people see these mistakes, the reports about the clots come up, and people shy away from taking something that the world needs people to be taking.
It's powerful.
Yeah, I think that confusion part is the ultimate unforced error, right? Had this collaboration gone more smoothly, we probably would have had a vaccine that people would not have had any hesitancy about. And instead, we've inserted a modest amount of head fakery into this whole thing, and that's just leads to confusion. And the number one thing is we're seeing around the world is this is still a very lethal virus. The mutations we still don't understand, and the more people that get vaccinated, the more protection that we have. So the hesitancy is really just impeding it. So it was the fact that this goes from first to last, and then I have to say, this kicker of the story of just from AstraZeneca's perspective, they wouldn't even probably done this if they were to do it all over again. I just think really kind of sums it all up.
Yeah, not easy to go from favorite child to problem child, that's for sure. Hey, Joel, thank you so much. Joel Weber, editor of Bloomberg Businessweek. Jeremy Keene, the features editor of the magazine. For those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, we're going to continue on Business Week. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, based
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Friday, April 9th, on track for a winning week. Third in a row, we've got the Dow, the S&P at records, NASDAQ pushing higher. We're holding close to session highs. Stocks advancing as investors shrug off concern over inflation. They're focused on prospects for an economic rebound. Retailers, tech, and industrial shares driving the advance in the S&P 500 index, on pace for its third straight weekly rally, the longest run since October. Trading, though, sluggish, volume just about 30% below the average of the past 30 days. S&P up 12 now to 4,109, a gain of 0.3%. The Dow's up 141, up 0.4%. NASDAQ higher by 6, a gain of less than 0.1%. 10-year yield 1.66%. Gold is down $13 the ounce at $17.42, a drop of about 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 59.35 a barrel. Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco President Mary Daly says she is bullish on the rebound for the U.S. economy, but there is still a long way to go before the recovery is complete, and we'll wait for the data to show it. She was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
So I've been pretty bullish on how the economy is.
And we'll get back to that a little later on. The S&P 500 index, as I mentioned, trading at a record right now, higher by 12, a gain of 0.3%. Gold is down 0.7%, 17.42 the ounce. Amazon workers at an Alabama warehouse won't be joining a retail union. That vote a setback for labor organizers and a significant victory for the world's largest online retailer. Amazon shares up now by 1.8%. Again, recapping the Dow, the S&P, they're both at records. The Dow up 0.4%, S&P up 0.3. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Tim. So you remember the story we told everyone about a few weeks ago? It was a Bloomberg exclusive. It was broken by one of our reporters. It was about the startup Verkada, and thousands of its surveillance devices were hacked into. We are learning more, though, about that company, including about the frat boys culture that reigned there. It's our most read story on the Bloomberg.
Yeah, and for good reason. It is a fantastic story. William Turton is a Bloomberg News cybersecurity reporter, and he joins us on the phone now. William, I'm glad we're getting to talk about this again. William was on Quick Take with me a little earlier in the day to talk about this story. What did you learn about the culture of Verkada, and how perhaps it was connected to the problems that the company has had when it comes to its own cybersecurity?
Thanks for having me. So we spoke to, 8 current and about 16 former employees who told us that, the company in some ways was comparable to a frat house, particularly its sales team. The sales team was really focused on profits and scale. And in the course of doing that, they threw a lot of parties, even parties during the pandemic, but they also misled their customers. They made them promises about the security of its products that just simply weren't true. They told potential customers that Verkada cameras are virtually unhackable. They would tell customers that Verkada was an MIT/Stanford company, which is not true. Just the co-founders are alumni of MIT and Stanford. And so, this culture, a lot of employees said that, when the hack eventually happened, they weren't that surprised because, for a company that has so much valuable kind of insight, and it's essentially running just kind of a massive private surveillance state, they didn't take a lot of care to make sure that the privacy and security of its cameras were protected.
And yet they have some impressive investors, Sequoia Capital.
Yeah. They've raised tens of millions of dollars in venture capital investment. They've grown extremely quickly. They've gone, they started in 2017 with, essentially no market share to now being one of the biggest players in the market. And that is because, they've had such a massive cash infusion, right? And so, it does beg the question, where was the oversight? Where was, the adults in the room, basically to make sure that, the company wasn't run like this in a way that, people told us they felt like they were bullied, women felt like they were degraded, and where, with oversight to make sure a massive hack like this that, will probably follow the company's reputation for a very long time didn't happen.
Can I just say, it's an incredible work of reporting by you, Ryan Gallagher, Sarah McBride, and Brody Ford, because you guys, tell us about who you talked to, because you get into a lot of specifics. Certainly what resonated with me was some of the things about video footage of female employees being passed around among male colleagues who then offered graphic comments. Tell us who you talked to really kind of confirm what was going on, because these are some big charges.
Yeah, so, we spoke to current and former employees. And, I will say we did speak to some people who defended the company. But, even the people that we spoke to who defended the company could not deny the reality of the culture at Verkada, right? But, the company has said that they're making changes. They're trying to make it a more inclusive and equitable workplace. But, employees have not seen that change yet. We spoke to people who are currently still employed there, and they've said not much has changed. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the company moving forward.
William, when you dig into histories of Silicon Valley startups that are now big companies, you often do find times and instances where they were frat-like environments. And I brought this up earlier in our conversation. Reading your story today, it really reminded me of what I read about Uber and Travis Kalanick and this God mode that allowed so many employees to actually see where specific customers were going in Uber at any given time. Is what happened at Verkada so much different than what has happened at so many other Silicon Valley startups?
Right. I mean, God mode is such a good comparison because it's so. It's almost exactly the same, right? There was a feature at Verkada called Super Admin that allowed hundreds of its employees to view the live feeds or archive videos of any of its customers, and that's also the hackers got in through one of those accounts. And initially, I think some people tried to say, "Oh, well, they should secure those accounts better so the hackers can't get in." And the response was, no, those accounts should not exist. That ability should not exist. And now Verkada has gotten rid of that feature, and they have a new process whereby customers have to kind of manually grant Verkada access to its cameras. It's a great question. Like, it is kind of comparable to a lot of the cultures here. But, at the end of the day, this company is in charge of tons of surveillance cameras. So you might expect, a little bit more decorum, professionalism, and kind of understanding the weight of the responsibility they have.
Well, even Sequoia Capital, their most prominent investor, as you kick off your story, they had a pretty heated conversation, it sounds like, with Verkada after this hacking came out about, shut off the cameras to us.
Yes. I mean, this was one of the most remarkable moments for us when we were reporting this story. In the wake of the hack, Verkada was having these weekly webinars with the CEO where they would answer questions from customers. And not only was Sequoia an investor in the company, they also used Verkada cameras, right? And so it was kind of incredible for us to see one of their IT employees on that call asking, hey, how can we make it so Verkada employees can access our cameras? I mean, that was a really stunning moment, honestly, in our reporting.
What happened at the Casper mattress store?
And you only have 30 seconds.
A drunken sales party that was in part a scavenger hunt ended up inside of a Casper mattress store. Many drunken employees were wrestling, taking pictures, posing on the beds, so much so that a customer service person in the Casper store called the Verkada customer service line to ask them to bring someone in to knock it off. And they knew they were doing that because they're all wearing Verkada merchandise while they were in the store.
Listen,
unbelievable.
You got to go to the story. There's so much detail about what was going on at the company. But I also, to be fair, you did also ask Verkada to address all of these issues. So it's all in the story because they have certainly responses to the concerns about how it was being marketed and what was going on inside the firm. Great piece of reporting. Another great piece of reporting because William Turton broke that initial hacking story for us a few weeks ago. William Turton, cybersecurity reporter at Bloomberg News, on the phone in New York City. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's get a check of world and national news with Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. President Joe Biden is releasing a $1.5 trillion wish list for the federal budget. He's asking for an 8.4% increase in discretionary spending with substantial gains for education, health care, housing, and environmental protection. The administration's outline kicks off a months-long process in which Congress is likely to significantly reshape those priorities. Well, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers is supportive of the administration's plan for tackling the nation's infrastructure. But he tells Bloomberg he'd like to see the money spent a little differently.
Frankly, I'd have liked to see more traditional infrastructure in this package because I think we're decades behind, and I'm not sure this is big enough to bring us to the forefront, and I'm not sure there's enough really major, large-scale projects.
As for increased taxes on millionaires, Summers says they deserve it. For the full interview with Summers, tune in to Bloomberg Wall Street Week, airing at 6 p.m. Wall Street time here on Bloomberg Radio. Former President Donald Trump is endorsing a former rival in his bid for re-election. Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reports.
The former president is giving his support to Florida Senator Marco Rubio. In a statement, Trump calls Rubio a tireless advocate for the people of Florida. Both Trump and Rubio traded insults during the 2016 Republican presidential primary, but the senator did campaign for his one-time rival after he won the nomination. Former President Trump's daughter Ivanka had considered running for Rubio's seat, but back in February, she called Rubio to tell him she had reconsidered. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. Back to you, Carol and Tim.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Well, the last few summers have seen California devastated by wildfires. They've destroyed entire communities, burned homes to the ground, ruined crops across the state, and claimed many lives. Now, as the season approaches again, we're getting word that another harsh fire season could be coming for the Golden State. Here with more is Greg Jarrett with a special report from our Bloomberg 960 studios in San Francisco.
It seems the respite between increasingly lethal fire seasons is shorter each year. The harshness of the seasons was put on display globally in November of 2018 when the entire Sierra foothill town of Paradise was razed by a fast-moving fire that displaced the entire population of 27,000.
I can't get through the IC. I'm at 13006 on Cal Road with 20 civilians. We're completely surrounded by fire. We're taking a safe zone.
A song sung at an evacuation center parking lot by Nate Smith and Michael Goodwin went viral.
One of these days, we're gonna see the sunset rise in paradise.
A year after that fire, only 4,000 people had returned to Paradise, and now the population is near pre-fire levels, but they face another season now of high fire danger. Bloomberg meteorologist Brian Sullivan says it's a lack of moisture.
Right now, California is 99% abnormally dry and almost 91% covered by drought.
Brooks Painter is the director of winemaking for Visa Tui Winery in Castello de Amorosa in Napa County.
It's actually the second drought year. Here in Napa Valley, we average about 25 inches of rainfall. In 2020, we were at about 7 to 8 inches, and now we're looking at almost the same, maybe a little bit less.
Brian Sullivan says this not only presents fire danger, but pressure on agriculture and the price of some products nationally and globally.
One of the big things that come out of California is almonds, which take a lot of water, and then you also have a lot of vegetables that come out of California. I think they're one of the largest producers of tomatoes in the world, for instance. The other issue here is you're going to get political and societal conflicts because people are going to be wanting that water and pushing each other around maybe a little bit, possibly going to court about who gets the water rights off the various rivers that are coming down out of the mountains.
Christine McMorrow of the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection says they're getting ready early.
There is concern about the lack of moisture going into fire season this year, especially this early in the season.
McMorrow says they are a bit short-staffed due to COVID-19, which hit the state prison population hard. Inmate crews make up a lot of the ground crews that fight the fires. California released a lot of those prisoners this past year due to the pandemic.
And so CAL FIRE is exploring ways to replace those crews because we don't see that staffing level ramping back up.
Then there's the issue of the pandemic and an early fire season butting heads again. Dr. Stephanie Christensen is a pulmonary specialist at the University of California, San Francisco, and has dealt with heavy smoke levels over the past several years.
So with these fire seasons kind of coming over and over again, we are certainly nervous that we are going to see more problems with people's lungs. The more you can do to protect yourself, the better.
Richmond, California is a suburb of San Francisco, just across the bay. Point Richmond is a community in Richmond where Edith Sellers is the co-founder of CERT, or Community Emergency Reaction Team.
We are an urban interface. We're considered high-risk fire danger, even though we are a major city of more than 100,000 people. We still have wildlands, and wildlands mean the possibility of houses going up.
Sellers says their main function right now is getting citizens ready to bug out, evacuate.
Don't let your car get below half tank of gas, because if you need to go, you will need to go.
Last year,
if anything, this last year was very much a come to Jesus moment when we had a full day where the sun didn't rise. It was dark the entire day because of the smoke.
Drought, high winds, and lots of above-ground power lines all have Californians on edge in 2021. In San Francisco, I'm Greg Jarrett, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Greg Jarrett there, and certainly something to keep on our radar, and fingers crossed that we don't have another season like last one. All right, let's get back to the world of markets and business news. Here is Charlie Pellett.
Thank you very much. We've got NASDAQ just turning negative with just about 44 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. NASDAQ now lower by 2 points, down less than 0.1%. The Dow, the S&P holding on to gains. They are at records. Stocks on track for another record as investors shrug off concern over inflation. They're focusing on prospects for an economic rebound. Retailers, technology, and industrial shares driving the advance in the S&P 500 index, on pace for its third straight weekly rally, the longest run since October. S&P up 11, a gain of 0.3%. The Dow's up 147, up 0.4. Again, to repeat, NASDAQ now lower by 3, down less than 0.1%. 10-year yield, 1.66%. We've got gold down $13 the ounce, down 0.7% at $17.42. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, $59.35 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellett. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Tim, we got some news today. President Biden's top economic and national security advisors, they're going to host more than a dozen chief executive officers on Monday. They're going to talk about the infrastructure plan, but they're also going to talk about that against the global semiconductor shortage. We've been talking a lot about this.
We have, and we see it hitting industry after industry. And in fact, the U.S. wants to try to fix the issues with our own shortage of chips, but easier said than done. We're joined by Ian King, U.S. semiconductor and networking reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from San Francisco. Ian, you have a new story out that talks about the chip industry's problem with its carbon footprint. And reading through this, I'm just shocked at how much energy goes into making this tiny piece of hardware that ends up inside our hardware. Take us through how it's done and why it uses so much energy.
It's basically a photolithographic process, which means you are layering materials onto discs of silicon and then burning patterns into it and then scraping off parts of that material to sort of build up this 3D structure, which gives a chip its function. Basically, it's a very, very tiny circuit. We're making hundreds of millions of these a month in some of these large factories. We're processing multiple tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of wafers of silicon. So while the actual end component itself is really, really small, these giant factories, and for example, one that I visited in South Korea is a mile around, are really, some of the most advanced facilities when it comes to manufacturing anywhere in the world. And they're working on something which is enormously complicated and takes about 3 months to complete the process of making one of these things.
So what's fascinating about your story and the reporting here, Ian, is this whole idea of, we're on this race, certainly globally, but in the United States as well, to deal with climate change and the impact on our climate of rising, carbon levels. At the same time, you've got President Biden out there with this massive infrastructure plan and also a plan to boost semiconductor production here in the United States. Those seem like two major worlds colliding.
Yeah, I mean, it's a central sort of irony of the chip industry that everything they've been working towards has made their end products more efficient, right? You take for granted that your phone works for a day and yet does more and more for you every year. Well, how is that possible? Well, it's possible, but not because batteries are getting better. It's possible because the chips are getting better. They're becoming more efficient. These giant data centers that we all rely on to get our Gmail, our recommendations, everything, right? That modern life has come to sort of grant to us are more and more efficient and they're more and more powerful. But at the same time, the actual process of making those pieces of silicon that are more efficient has become more difficult technologically, and it requires more energy to make it. So it's something that the industry is very conscious of, and they're trying to do something about. But at the same time, it's very difficult.
Well, it's not just energy, it's also water, another natural resource that goes into making chips. Again, I had no idea that water was required in the chip making process. Why is water needed? And what are some countries doing in order to make sure there's enough of it to satisfy the demand for chips?
Right. I mean, as we said, it's a photolithographic process. So you're layering material on it, you're scraping parts of it off, you're layering on it. There's up to 100 layers on some of the most advanced chips. So at some point, you've actually got to get rid of those bits of material that you don't need. And pure water is the way that they do that, and that requires an enormous amount of rinsing all the time is going on. As you alluded to, Taiwan is a small island off the coast of China that is suffering a drought right now, and TSMC, a company that pretty much we all depend on, had to, line up trucks full of water that it had to buy to keep its plants running.
And I do wonder too, Ian, that with the focus on ESG investing, at some point, do big institutional money managers say, listen, or how do they kind of come to terms with it that chips are going increasingly in everything in our world at the same time? If these semi manufacturers don't figure out a more efficient or less climate impactful way to produce chips, does investment money start to run away from them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're aware as well as I am of the massive run-up we've seen in the valuation that the chip industry stocks have had. That's clearly. But then if you look behind the scenes, and you're absolutely right, it came as a shock to me, and I've covered the industry for years, to realize just how energy intensive, how resource intensive these companies are. They've blown past the auto industry in terms of the amount of water and greenhouse gases that they're emitting. So this is clearly something, and obviously if you use something like the Bloomberg, you can find these numbers like we did for our story that show that they're heading up to the right, and they need to do something about this. Again, they're aware of this and they're trying, but given the demand for their basic products, this isn't an easy problem to solve.
Well, that's what I was going to do is, we like to look forward. I know you do too. What is the solution? Is this that they've got to spend, time figuring out how to do this in a more efficient way, or what is the solution, Ian?
Yeah. I mean, I spoke with the CEO of Applied Materials, Gary Dickerson, and Applied Materials is the largest maker of the equipment that's used to manufacture these machines. And he's put, kind of a line in the sand saying, look, we need to get 30% more efficient in terms of the electricity we use. The machines need to be 30% faster. We need to use 30% less water. And he set this target by 2030. And that, obviously is aggressive and sounds good. But when you factor that against the rate at which we are increasingly demanding these things and using these chips, I don't know if that's enough.
Yeah. I mean, is it fast enough? That's what I always think. That's 10 years, 9 years?
Right. And if you look at the end use of chips alone, in data centers, we're going from kind of small single-digit percentages uses of the world's electricity supply to over 20%.
Yeah.
Just to crunch your Google recommendations, right? Your Google searches and everything else.
Yeah, Ian, as you note in your piece, TSMC's annual electricity consumption is estimated by Greenpeace at 4.8% of Taiwan's entire usage, more than half of the capital of Taipei. It's actually absolutely mind-boggling. What about when it comes to renewables? Why haven't renewables been successful in this? And potentially, why can't they recycle water that they use and create some sort of system that uses the same water over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, you can, and definitely efforts are are underway. If you look at what we quoted Intel as saying in the story, they're abruptly conscious of that. If you put a plant in a desert state like Arizona, then you better be watching how much water you use. But I think back to the central problem here is that you can recycle, and you can use solar, and you can have wind farms off the coast and all of these things. But the sheer sort of magnitude of the amount of energy that these things are using, I think, is running away from the industry at the moment. And their first job is to make chips and make money.
It's just another story by you, Ian King, and team, where we learned so much. Ian King, U.S. Semiconductor Networking Reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from San Francisco. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, coming up, what do we got?
We got the chart of the day, and guess what?
What?
With some SPACs, we're talking IPOs. It's going to be a good one.
I wonder what the song's going to be.
Yeah, no songs about SPACs yet.
SPAC boogie.
Well, actually,
I don't know.
Wait, I feel like Elon Musk might have, I don't know. Maybe Elon Musk is going to have one. Who knows?
Maybe. All right, in the meantime, let's get another check on the trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
All right, sudden leg higher. Last time I told you NASDAQ was down. Right now, best level of the day on NASDAQ, up 30 points right now, higher by 0.2%. But the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing. 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Bottom line here, big jump as we race toward the closing bell. Light volume, but the S&P up 22 now. That is a record at 41.19, higher by 0.5%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 237 points, up 0.7%, bringing its year-to-date gain now to 10.2%. Nasdaq's up 32, up by 0.2%, and to be clear, both the Dow and the S&P are trading at records. Investors shrugging off concern over inflation. They're focused on prospects for an economic rebound. S&P on pace for its third straight weekly rally, the longest run since October. 10-year yield 1.66%, down 12.30 seconds. Gold is down $13 the ounce, lower by 0.8%, $17.42 on the precious metal. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, $59.33 for a barrel of WTI. Pfizer and its partner BioNTech say they will be asking regulators in the U.S. and elsewhere to allow use of their COVID-19 vaccine in adolescents between the ages of 12 and 15. Pfizer up now by 1.7%, BioNTech higher by 6.4%. As the U.S. makes progress in getting people vaccinated, Dr. Andrew Peckosh, a professor of molecular microbiology and immunology at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, says right now we are in a critical period.
We have a few weeks now, or maybe even 2 months at most, where we need to keep our public health interventions in place while we're vaccinating the general population. We're doing such a fantastic job of vaccinating people in this country, but we need the other tools to keep the case numbers down. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we have variants springing up everywhere, and we're going to lose the advantage that we have with the vaccine.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. And again, among the vaccine names that we follow closely, Pfizer up 1.8%, BioNTech up 6.3%, ADRs of AstraZeneca up 0.9%, Moderna's up 5.7%, Johnson & Johnson down 1.4%. Recapping a surge in stocks as we head toward the close, S&P up now by 22, best level of the day and a record, up by 0.55%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Well, thank you, Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg.
Gotta love a little Miss Jackson.
Miss Jackson. Yes.
That's right.
Miss Jackson, if you're nasty.
Exactly. I wasn't going to go there, but I kind of love that you did, Dave.
Yeah, well, you know.
You made my week, my day, my month. That's no doubt about it.
It's the little things that count, Carol.
So what do you got? What's the chart?
What do we got? You know, what have you done for me lately? I mean, I came up with that phrase last hour talking about how people might look at earnings. And then I thought, you know what, kind of applies to the latest chart, because what it does, it compares the NASDAQ 100 with indexes that track initial public offerings, IPOs, and special purpose acquisition companies, aka SPACs. And it's something Michael Schau over at Market Field Asset Management did in his latest weekly note. And if nothing else, the contrast over the past 2 months really kind of jumps out, because, you know, we saw NASDAQ's biggest companies fall, we saw IPOs fall, we saw SPACs fall, but the comeback is really the interesting part. You know, the NASDAQ 100 has basically made it back to where it was when it peaked in February. You haven't seen anything like that for the Renaissance IPO Index, which tracks newly public companies. As of yesterday, it was down 15% from a record set in mid-February. And then there's this INDXX SPAC and Next Gen IPO Index. How's that for a mouthful? In any case, it also reached a high in mid-February, and as of yesterday, it was down 23%. So these indexes have not delivered the kind of recovery that the NASDAQ 100 has. And in fact, if you look at the index right now, if it were to close at its current level, it would be a record. So, you know, you might say it's been an uneven recovery, or that you could say there was rally inequality, as the chart points out. And if you want to see it for yourself, folks, send me an email. I'll get you the chart, the explanation that goes with it, and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
So, Dave, what do you think? Is a lull in SPACs? Is that what we're going to see? I mean, we're not seeing nearly the number of new SPACs being created that we saw just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and you're not seeing the reaction in terms of deals either.
Yeah.
You know, there was this one company, Bridgetown Holdings. We reported that they were setting up to buy a company or merge with it, however you want to describe it, out in Indonesia. And, you know, the stock initially rose in pre-market trading in response to this potential deal. People familiar with the matter are telling us that it's in advanced talks. But you look at Bridgetown now, I mean, this is a company that's backed by a couple of billionaires, Richard Lee and Peter Thiel.
Right.
It's down 2%.
Well, listen, this doesn't surprise me. You know, it's like sure thing versus who knows what's going to happen, right? I mean, big tech, we know what they are. These are companies with real revenues, real earnings growth. And then you've got SPACs. We've had the stories on the terminal. There's a lot of, you know, SPACs that haven't even put money to work. We talked to actually one, Stefan Seelig, who's chairman over at Rotor, and they bought Sarcos Robotics. They did Sarcos actually listing in that SPAC deal this week. But, you know, Dave, it makes sense to me. You know, maybe not the IP. I don't know about the IPOs. I feel like IPOs have been on a tear as well, but that SPACs maybe aren't performing. That makes sense to me. They haven't put a lot of the money to work.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you look at the cases where they have put money to work, the kinds of companies they're merging with, you know, they're the ones that would have been really speculative and gone public through initial public offerings in the 90s. So, you know, it's sort of a different animal, but it gets you to the same place where you're taking a bigger risk than you might ordinarily by investing in those companies as opposed to ones that are more established.
Yeah, exactly. Janet Jackson, no, not Janet Jackson. Was it LaToya? That was, I think, a Masked Singer.
There you go.
Got nothing from you two.
Yeah, I'm like just staring into this. I have no idea, Carol. You know what I can talk about and what I can't talk about. Masked Singer.
Totally random.
Oh,
all right, Dave's going to be back a little bit later on with his stock of the day.
All right, let's get a check of world and national news with Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Tim. President Biden is forming a commission to study the possibility of adding more seats to the Supreme Court. Biden promised during the campaign he would form a bipartisan commission to look at more seats or maybe setting term limits for justices. He wants the 36-person commission to deliver their report in 188 days. Loyola law professor Laurie Levinson is impressed with Biden's choices for the commission.
These are amazing people who have been deans at the prestigious law schools, have worked for the Justice Department, who have been federal judges themselves.
Levinson says some key cases are coming before the court concerning abortion and gay rights, and there are concerns from liberals that the decisions will be skewed by the conservative majority. Prosecutors in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin continue to focus on the cause of his death. Today, retired forensic pathologist Dr. Lindsay Thomas testified that George Floyd died as a direct result of having Chauvin's knee on his neck for 9 minutes.
The activities of the law enforcement officers resulted in Mr. Floyd's death, and that specifically those activities were the subdual, the restraint, and the neck compression.
Thomas says the autopsy ruled out other possible causes. Defense attorneys have argued that Floyd's drug use likely caused his death. Prince Philip will be laid to rest with all the honors due a prince and a consort to Queen Elizabeth II, but the coronavirus pandemic means it will be a more low-key farewell. Philip's body will not lie in state. He will not have a state funeral. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. This story is among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal today. It has to do with Leon Black of Apollo Global Management.
Yeah, Leon Black said that he paid to hide an affair, but denies it led to his exit at Apollo. Remember, he abruptly stepped down last month as CEO of Apollo Global Management, but he did say that he made payments for years to keep a consensual affair secret, and that accusations over the episode on social media had nothing to do with his departure.
Man, there's some back and forth here, though, because apparently Black has also denied allegations that were levied by, I guess it's Güzel Ganivia, who I guess he had the relationship with, who on Twitter, she wrote in Little Notice Post back in mid-March, I was sexually harassed and abused by him for years and ultimately forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement back in 2015. And Black issued a statement after the Post reported that at least 4 Apollo board members had become aware of her tweets by the time he handed off his post March 21st, citing unspecified health issues for himself and his wife. I feel like as we continue to follow Leon Black and Apollo, it just becomes kind of more interesting.
It does. Here's what he said in a statement. Quote, I foolishly had a consensual affair with Miss Javnieva that ended more than 7 years ago, but any allegation of harassment or any other inappropriate behavior towards her is completely fabricated. The truth is that I've been extorted by Miss Javnieva for many years and made substantial payments to her based on her threats to go public concerning our relationship in an attempt to spare my family from public embarrassment.
Yeah, and it's a personal matter, he says, and that it had nothing to do with Apollo or my decision to step away from the firm. Nonetheless, this is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg. And, I think when the news came out that he was stepping down, I think it was, a bit of a surprise in terms of how it's played out. I mean, he has been so obviously associated with the firm he created.
And what was surprising about it was not that he was stepping down because we knew he was going to step down or later this year, but that he was doing it abruptly and earlier than anticipated.
Right, exactly. And I thought, was he going to hold on to the chairmanship or something? I don't know. There was just some other things that was interesting. Anyway, this is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg. So for more details, go to Bloomberg.com. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell, a sudden surge in stocks. We begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. The ride-hailing company Didi Chuxing has filed confidentially for an American initial public offering. That, according to people familiar with the matter, it may fetch a valuation of $70 to $100 billion. Now, let's head right over to the First Word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. And here is Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks trading in the green today with the Dow currently up 240 points. S&P's gained 24. NASDAQ is higher by 41. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.66%. Gold is trading lower by 12. Transports rise 86 points. And among the main 11 S&P sectors, healthcare and consumer discretionary led, while energy was under pressure again. Leaders to the upside in the Dow, Honeywell and UNH, J&J and Boeing led to the downside. And speaking of Boeing, they grounded dozens of 737 MAX jets on an electrical flaw. In other news, Amazon clinched their win over the union. And after earnings, Levi Strauss rose as much as 9% before pairing gains, while WD-40 fell as much as 16% after results. Wrapping things up, Home Depot hit a record high. Live from the First Word Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, speaking of record highs, the Dow, the S&P, both at records right now. Bill Maloney, we thank you. Happy Friday. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg, type SQUAWK, S-Q-U-A-W-K on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It certainly is. Thank you, Charlie Pellet. Well, it's been a little over a year since the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted our lives. Every day at this time, we're taking a look at different industries or ways of life that underwent monumental change in the past 12 months. Here with today's installment of A Year Like No Other is Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
There may be no place like home, but there's also no going back. The way we buy and sell homes has permanently changed as people locked down by the pandemic refuse to get locked out.
Sometimes, if it's impractical to get to the home, they'll make an offer sight unseen.
Daryl Fairweather, chief economist at Redfin, says more than 60% of home purchasers this past year made offers that way. And sellers, she says, also like the socially distanced home shopping.
They're really grateful that they don't have to have an open house. They don't have to have a bunch of strangers going through.
And Gene Munster, co-founder of Loop Ventures, says virtual and 3D Matterport technology are going to make this even more common.
They could have a package where you put a sensor outside that monitors the noise from traffic, put a sensor inside that monitors moisture.
And Redfin's Fairweather says the current tight inventory means this trend will continue to accelerate, even after this year like no other.
We'll see more people putting an offer sight unseen just to remain competitive.
Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the drive to the close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, we've just got about 9 minutes left in today's trading session. We're getting ready to wrap up the day and the week. And this is a week where we have seen quite a rally, Tim.
Yeah, we really have. You heard the numbers from Charlie just now. The S&P 500 higher by 0.7% right now. The Dow higher by 0.8%. We're trading near records.
Yeah, and we're up big time, almost 2.6% for the week overall on the S&P. So let's get to it with Dana Dioria. She's co-chief investment officer of the publicly held InvestNet PMC. She joins us on the phone in Connecticut. Dana, nice to have you here with Tim and myself. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great to have you here, too. It's been an interesting week. For a while, we were like ho-hum looking for reasons for, there were days where we were up a little bit, down a little. But yet, by the end of the week, we've seen a pretty significant move to the upside here. What's the macro backdrop here?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing a lot of good indicators and, across the board. So consumer sentiment is up. Obviously, consumer confidence is up. We had a great jobs report, as you know, added 916,000 jobs in March. PMI is up. So really kind of across the board, there's a lot of good indicators. And of course, we have the COVID checks kind of hitting. So it makes sense that it makes sense that stocks would follow, obviously.
So what derails this, though? I mean, we talked about this throughout the show today, just what we've seen so far this year. The S&P 500 for the week, Carol mentioned the number. For the year, it's up 9.8%. Dow up more than 10%. NASDAQ up more than 7.7%. Like, what derails this rally here?
Well, we do have the specter of earnings season coming and, the newly released tax bill proposal. And so I think, we do have obviously all of this monetary stimulus, but at the same time now the market needs to grapple with what does it mean, these corporate tax increases. And I think you're getting more and more detail kind of coming out on this, and analysis is happening. And it will definitely be interesting to see as earnings season kicks off what companies have to say as they start to look and say, okay, what does this mean for, our dividends, our buybacks, CapEx, et cetera, right? Even our hiring. So I think what potentially derails it is sort of analysis and kind of a sinking in on what these tax hikes could mean. It's obviously a very ambitious bill, and that kind of getting priced in, which I don't think we've quite seen yet.
Hey, let me ask you, Dana, because Envestnet provides a lot of support for financial advisors, software tools. And from what I understand, your footprint is around 13 million investor accounts. So what are we seeing in those investor accounts? Where is new money being committed? What kind of growth are we seeing in terms of new funds being committed to investing?
Yeah, so, just at a high level, money is going into equities. As you can imagine, this last quarter with the interest rate increases, fixed income kind of really took a hit. So we know just at a high level, equities are seeing inflows, fixed income maybe some decreases. I will say in individual investor accounts that are guided by advisors, they're not as quick to move maybe, as some of the retail assets that are, directed brokerage, because the advisor is there trying to prescribe some discipline, keep you to your plan, right? If you're a 60-40, try to sort of keep you in that 60-40. And if after the last quarter that we had, you'd actually be, if you were rebalancing, you'd be buying, you'd be buying in the reverse, because of course you had a loss in fixed income, which is unusual. And I think a lot of people now getting their quarterly statements and looking and saying, wow, I lost 300 basis points in my fixed income are kind of grappling with that a little bit. But advisors are there to provide discipline and,
Well, let me ask you about this, because we've had a lot of discussions here on Bloomberg. A lot of people are asking, if the 60-40 portfolio is no longer good enough, especially if you take a look at what's happened in traditional fixed income over the last decade or so. It's been hard to find yield. So 60-40, is it still, that's what you guys are seeing in terms of the investor accounts, that people and financial advisors, they're still playing it kind of traditionally safe?
Yeah, it'll take a lot to move that, right? That 100%, that's a topic of conversation. And are there ways to get better yield? So certainly more interest in private markets. I mean, obviously you're looking then at accredited investors, qualified purchasers, but to the extent that, you're in the high net worth space, definitely looking at private markets and alternative options to say, okay, can I diversify that fixed income position? I mean, if you're in a 60-40, in 40%, you think about the chunk of money, right, that out of your overall investment that you're putting into something that's really low yielding. Return isn't great, and now, of course, as I mentioned, you're even seeing losses. The story had been, well, at least it's a mattress, right? And now it's not even that. So yes, 100%. There's questions about this. I think liquid alts as well for non-accredited.
Yeah. Listen, Dana, we got to run, but really appreciate your input today. Have a good weekend. Dana Dioria, Co-Chief Investment Officer over at Envestnet PMC. Stick around, folks. The closing bell in just about 3 minutes' time, right here on Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange, and it is on to the weekend. Late day surge. We'll get right to the numbers, give you the why in a moment, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 299 points. A lot of the gains coming in the final 30 minutes of trading, up by 0.9%, bringing its year-to-date gain to 10.4%. The Dow at a record, S&P also closing at a record today, 4,128 on the S&P as we head to the weekend, up 31 points, higher by 0.8%. NASDAQ up 70, higher by 0.5%, 10-year yield 1.66%. Stocks at a record as investors shrug off concern over inflation. They're focused on prospects for an economic rebound. S&P 500 index had its third straight weekly rally. So what potentially could go wrong? Dana Dioria is co-CIO at Investnet PMC. She was our guest moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
We do have obviously all of this monetary stimulus, but at the same time now the market needs to grapple with what does it mean, these corporate tax increases. And I think you're getting more and more detail kind of coming out on this, and analysis is happening. And
after earnings, Levi Strauss shares up today by 2.6%, and Amazon workers at an Alabama warehouse voted not to join a retail union, a setback for labor organizers and a significant victory for the world's largest online retailer. Amazon shares advanced today by 2.2%. So again, recapping, equities surge, late day rally, best level of the day, record on the Dow, record on the S&P, a move higher for NASDAQ. Recapping, S&P up 31, ending the week at 4,128, up 0.8%. Dow Industrials up 299, up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 70, up by 0.5%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Whoa, yeah, what I say.
Nobody move a muscle. Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and shakers.
Damn, Stippy, you got some moves.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody. Wrapping up the trading week here on this Friday. Charlie breaking down those major equity averages, and we did finish at our highs of the day. We saw a leg up in the last half hour or so of trading. So what does this mean in terms of the S&P 500, the broader market? And Tim, if I look at it, overwhelmingly, we saw most of the members higher today, 361 to be exact, lower on the day, 140 in the S&P 500 for unchanged.
Yeah, a lot of green when you even dig into the industry groups here. Healthcare leading the pack today, higher by 1.16%. We'll go ahead and call that 1.2%. Consumer discretionary higher by 1.2% as well. Information technology coming in just about a percentage point higher today, as did industrials. There were three laggards, though, three in the red. Energy, the biggest laggard among them all, down 0.5 percentage point. Utilities down about 0.1%, and consumer staples just about down 0.05%.
Having said that, we saw a rally in those major equity averages. The outperformer of the NASDAQ up more than 3%. Wow. Bloomberg News, yeah, exactly, WOA. Bloomberg News global macro strategist Vince Signorella joining us on the phone in Westchester. For what seemed like a somewhat boring week, Vince, here we are.
Yes, it was actually a boring week until probably about 30 minutes ago.
Right?
People seem to forget. I've actually heard somebody say this week that the stocks were lower or quiet, or volume was quiet because it was a nice day outside, and that it prompted me to look for a very heavy economics textbook to throw at them. But this is a holiday week in Europe. Typically, you've got corporate earnings next week. You've got the debate over corporate taxes, which people just don't know where that's going to fall. And those things, I think, kept volumes down for a while, and people weren't jumping out of the gate. Today, we saw a big surge in producer prices. The market just shrugged it off. They didn't seem to care about it. And you've got Powell coming up on Sunday on 60 Minutes. And he is more than likely, he is definitely going to repeat his dovish mantra. And it'll be interesting to see how futures open in Asia on Sunday night while he's speaking, because I would think he's going to give risk assets a boost going into next week.
Hey, what do you make of this media blitz that he's doing?
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if he's just trying. It almost seems like he's doing what Biden is doing, is trying to sell his case.
Yeah.
That, this monetary policy is absolutely necessary, despite what some people may be saying that, we're there, we're out of the woods, the economy is going to surge. We don't need any more fiscal or monetary stimulus, and we should be worrying about inflation. And he's just taking the other side of that argument. And they keep pounding the dual mantra, the dual mandate, employment and inflation. And if inflation gets to 2.5% and employment doesn't really rise as much as they would like, he's pretty much suggested they're not going to move.
Is he getting political in terms of saying, listen, we're okay. Inflation's not a worry. We still got to get jobs. And so anybody who's saying we can't do this massive infrastructure program, he's going to, because of inflationary concerns or what have you, he's saying, nope, it's okay. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to figure it out, because he's really taking it to the masses by going to 60 Minutes in many ways.
Yes, totally. And,
if he shows up on the Today Show, then we really know he's all in on the masses.
Yeah, I don't think he's being political. I think part of it you might want to look at and say, he's really worried about if things roll off and the vaccine doesn't get there ahead of the virus variants. There isn't anything more he can do at this point. They are at the lower bound. So from his standpoint, he's making the effort that a lot of European central bankers in the past didn't do with European fiscal governments, which is he's really supporting this fiscal spending and encouraging it very much so. And it really is, when you think about nearly 10 million people still unemployed, it's better for the Fed to play catch up than divert this economy now and cause it to stall.
Hey, Vince, in about 30 seconds, what do we have to really watch out for when companies start to report earnings in the next couple of weeks and we start to hear guidance? What are you going to be listening for?
Well, there haven't been any upgrades to earnings from what I understand. So I would be leaning to the side that they would beat. If we see, misses are going to be not taken well by the street, especially at the levels of the market we're at now. So we want to see some beats, and we want to see some decent projections and guidance going forward.
And be sure to check out Vince's work on the Bloomberg Terminal, because he's got an interesting story about those jobless claims next week and how they might contain a pleasant surprise. Vince Signorella, you have a great weekend.
And you too, both of you.
Okay, be well. Bloomberg News global macro strategist Vince Signorella. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for the price on Wilson.
Open up the door, it's Dave. Who? Dave.
Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson. Come on in and give us your stock of the day.
Lovesac, Tim. It's a maker and retailer of modular furniture.
Did you say Love Shack, or did you say Love Sack? Oh, okay.
Sack. It's spelled S-A-C and serves as the brand name for beanbag-style chairs. The company also has couches and love seats known as Sactionals.
They're all over the malls, right? You just kind of fall into them. They're comfy.
There you go. Lovesac was founded in 1995, went public in 2018 at $16 a share. The ticker is LOVE. The share dropped as much as 75% from their initial price through last April. Lovesac then took off as stay-at-home consumers spurred growth. Support from analysts helped. Data compiled by Bloomberg shows they have all recommended buying the stock for almost a year. All the analysts that follow the company, at least. One analyst, BTIG's Camilo Lyon, turned even more optimistic today. He raised his 12-month share price estimate by 24% to $77. That's the highest target in a Bloomberg survey. BTIG's call was made in advance of fiscal fourth quarter results due next Wednesday. Lovesac shares responded by rising to a record. They closed with a gain of almost 15%. That was the biggest for the stock since December.
Wow.
Come on.
66% year to date. And by the way, this is LOVE, not Southwest Airlines, LUV.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes, in case you're following along.
67% this year. Do you have a Lovesac, Dave, at home?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't
Tim,
either. No.
Me neither.
I guess we need them.
We do. Good stuff. Dave Wilson, you have a great weekend. Tim Stanovic, you have a great weekend. I'll see you Monday.
You too.
Hope to be back in the office.
Yeah, same.
All right, let's get to world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons we go in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Amazon workers decisively rejected an effort to unionize a warehouse in Alabama. It's a big win for the retail giant. Nearly 1,800 workers voted against the union, while 738 voted in favor. Stuart Applebaum is president of the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union, which led the organizing effort.
Today's announcement by the NLRB may not be what we wanted, but sadly, it is one that many have come to expect. Our system is broken, and Amazon took full advantage of that.
Applebaum says the union will challenge the results of the vote. Well, the White House is out with President Biden's so-called skinny budget, and Bloomberg's Nathan Hager reports it calls for a big boost to current spending levels.
It's a more than 8% increase over the fiscal 21 budget. President Biden's nearly 60-page, $1.52 trillion proposal calls for major increases in funding to fight inequality, disease, and climate change. The preliminary budget outline kicks off a months-long process in Congress. Republicans are likely to strongly oppose much of what's in the budget, but this marks President Biden's third foray into using federal power to expand help to low- and middle-income Americans. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager, Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden say they're keeping Queen Elizabeth and her family in their hearts following the death of Prince Philip. Biden told reporters he was a heck of a guy and will be missed. Prince Philip died earlier today at the age of 99. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You think of tech hubs, you think of Silicon Valley, Silicon Alley, some other cities like North Carolina, Raleigh, and North Carolina around the country. Well, the mayor of one Southeast city looking to add his city to the list. We're talking about Miami, and I caught up with the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez. He and his story and what he's looking to do in Miami is a subject of a story in the magazine. Check out an excerpt of the interview I did with him.
So I understand, and I understood, and I've understood for 10 years, that the future of our economy as a country, as a world, is tech-based. That is inescapable from my perspective. That is nonpartisan from my perspective. That's just a reality. And the quicker that cities embrace that reality and start fashioning their economies around that reality, the better off and the more equitable cities that we're going to have in America. And so that has been our goal, our mission. The How Can I Help tweet was sort of a lightning in the bottle moment where we propelled ourselves from someone sort of on the outer range of the conversation to literally the city that's most talked about right now in the world on tech. Whether anyone thinks that we're going to overtake Silicon Valley tomorrow or not, no one can dispute the fact that everybody right now is talking about Miami tech. It is the hottest thing, and it's been hot since that December 4th tweet, which is, I think, an accomplishment in and of itself because, you know, we live in a 24-hour news cycle where news changes quickly and people move on to the next story. And, you know, to keep and maintain the attention of the city for over 4 months of the country, for over 4 months in the world, really is a significant achievement.
That is the mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez. I caught up with him, and he is featured in our Business Week weekend radio show on Bloomberg Radio, also our podcast, and he talked about there specifically about a tweet that kind of got off or kicked off his efforts to make his city a new hub for technology. So you can hear more of that interview on our weekend show on Bloomberg Radio and on our podcast feed at Bloomberg.com. Also, check out the magazine because he and his city, they are subject of a story by Bloomberg's Miami Bureau Chief Jonathan Levin. Find that on newsstands, online, and on the Bloomberg Terminal. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. A record for the Dow, record for the S&P. S&P closing above 4,100 for the first time, posting its third straight weekly rally. Longest win since October. Volume, though, on U.S. exchanges hitting a new low for 2021. This week, the S&P 500 index was up 2.7%. Today, stocks climbed to a record as investors shrugged off concern over inflation and focused on prospects for an economic rebound. S&P up 31, ending the week at 41.28, up by about 0.8%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average now at 33,800, up 297 points today, up 0.9%. NASDAQ rallied 70, up by 0.5%. 10-year yield 1.65%. Gold at $17.43 the ounce, down 0.7%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%. 59.34 a barrel. So again, recapping, a record on Wall Street rally today. S&P up for the third week, advancing 31 points today, up by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It is indeed. All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So we did get some news today. We've been talking about it. Setback for the labor movement, a win, though, for the world's largest online retailer. We're talking about Amazon. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Reported and written by Bloomberg News labor reporter Josh Idelson for Bloomberg Business Week. He joins us on the phone in San Francisco. So, Josh, not a surprise, right? We expected the vote to go in Amazon's favor.
That's right. In fact, part of what is so painful about this for the labor movement is that it's not surprising, that it is a familiar type of defeat. And in recent decades, it is actually almost unheard of for a union to win a labor board election at a top non-union U.S. company unless they had already secured a deal with the company to not try to bust the union effort.
I do wonder, too, right, is this an Amazon story or this is just the decline of unionization, right? The formation of labor unions in the United States, they've really run out of steam over the last decade or so.
Well, in part, it's a story about what Amazon did, and we're going to, over the next months and years, likely see fighting in politics and at the agency and legal level about things Amazon did, like the mandatory anti-union meetings, the alleged pressure on the Postal Service and workers to create a mailbox on company property and to mail in ballots there, even though it was supposed to be a mail-in election rather than an on-site traditional physical ballot election. Mm-hmm. But it's also a story about what companies like Amazon legally are able to do within the bounds of U.S. labor law and the weak penalties and enforcement measures that exist if companies are accused of going beyond what they're legally allowed to do to crush an organizing effort.
Well, let's talk about, though, Amazon specifically. Josh, I feel like over the pandemic, we've done a lot of stories about, workers in distribution facilities and, whether or not they were, pressured to work, even if they had COVID concerns and so on and so forth. There's been a lot of stuff that has come out over the past 12 months or so. And I do wonder when the people who wanted a union at Amazon, what was it that they, were concerned about? What was it that they weren't getting in terms of benefits?
Workers talked about in Bessemer, Alabama, their concerns about the workload and the metrics as well as safety during COVID-19. And these are things that we've heard around the country, concerns from workers about the way that their movement and productivity and breaks are limited and tracked and punished, and the measures that the company has taken and hasn't taken in the pandemic. And so this vote in Alabama served to place a greater spotlight on workers' resistance to that. At the same time, the outcome is one that will be pointed to by supporters of the company for years to come. And it is a familiar, difficult defeat for a labor movement that has been declining for decades now in its membership in the United States.
What's next? Might we get a new vote, a recount, or a new vote altogether?
The union has already said that it is challenging at the labor board Amazon's conduct and the election outcome. So the remedies available to the federal labor board include calling for a new election. We will see that controversy play out over the next months. At the same time, there are organizing efforts going on around the country. Some of them may also try this labor board election route. Some may sidestep it, and some labor leaders have been saying they don't see a reason to focus on a labor board election precisely for reasons like this, the wide berth the company has to influence people's vote. Now, the challenge for labor is neither those types of elections nor other multi-pronged pressure campaigns have been successful at establishing a foothold for labor formally at companies like Amazon and Walmart and McDonald's.
That was interesting in your story, too. You point out how it's unusual for labor activism to emerge so quickly at an Amazon warehouse because turnover is high, and it typically takes workers some time and their initial enthusiasm basically to wear off. So it was interesting because this is a relatively new plant, correct?
That's right. This plant was opened last year, and so everything about this moved quickly, and one of the strategic choices that will be studied and considered that the union made was to file relatively quickly for a union election, and in order to keep the process moving relatively quickly, to go along with a push by the company to let a much larger number of workers, including temps, be able to be among the eligible voters.
Hey, just got about 40 seconds left here. Should we be expecting any other kind of labor votes to come up at other Amazon centers? Is that on the horizon? What are you seeing?
I think it is on the horizon. I think the outcome will give some people pause, and some people who have been avoiding the labor board process will see vindication here. But there are a lot of unions looking at how to tackle this company and a lot of workers interested in it, and I think we'll continue to see a diversity of tactics employed.
Well, great to check in with you because this has certainly been one of the big stories, corporate stories that we've been keeping an eye on today, and certainly that vote as well. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Bloomberg News labor reporter Josh Idelson reporting for Bloomberg Business Week and joining us on the phone in San Francisco. Amazon shares, by the way, finishing the day up 2.2% at $3,372 a share. This is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes, indeed. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser, right here on Bloomberg Radio. Hey, coming up, we're going to check in with the Wella Company CEO, Annie Young Scrivener. She recently took that spot just last fall, so we'll talk about how life has been for her and also talk about a new report that they've got on that they've come out with about inequities. We'll get to that in just a moment. First up, though, back to Charlie Pellet, a check on the world of business. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. Do want to begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. Aramco selling a 49% stake in its oil pipelines to a consortium led by EIG. Stocks, a record late-day surge, wild 30 minutes of trading. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all rallying. In fact, we closed at the best level of the day on a Friday ahead of a weekend. Most Fridays are. S&P up 31, a gain there of 0.8%, 41.28 on the S&P. The Dow advanced 297, up by 0.9%. NASDAQ up 70, that was a gain of 0.5%. Another record as investors were shrugging off concern over inflation. They're focused on prospects for an economic rebound. S&P closing above 4,100, posted its third straight weekly rally, longest run since October. On the week, S&P up by 2.7%. So here's where we wrap things up. S&P up 31, a gain of 0.8%, closing at 41.28. The Dow up 297, up 0.9%. NASDAQ up 70, a gain of 0.5%. 10-year yield 1.66%. Gold down $12 the ounce, lower by 0.7%, 17.43. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 59.36 a barrel. Fed Vice Chair Richard Clarida says policymakers are looking for, quote, hard numbers on whether they are reaching their goals on price stability and employment before adjusting interest rates. Clarida was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is a very unusual shock. A global shutdown, a shutdown of the global economy through a truly exogenous event, I think has never happened in my professional career because it impacted both supply and demand. So we're going to be learning as sectors come back online, and I'm sure there'll be surprises along the way, and we need to be attuned and attentive to the data flow.
Earnings season kicks off next week. Banks will be front and center today. J.P. Morgan Chase up 0.8%. Citigroup up by 0.1%. Bank of America up 0.7. Wells Fargo up by 1.2%. Again, recapping, 10-year yield 1.66%. Gold down 0.7%. S&P at a record up 31, a gain of 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, appreciate that. Well, this past year, we've had many conversations about inequities, and Wella Company is out with an inside look at gender equity in professional beauty. So here to share what they found and really also talk about her industry, which was shut down by the pandemic. We know that. We welcome Wella Company CEO Annie Young Scrivener. She is on the phone from the West Coast. And Annie, it's so nice to have you here with us. Before we get to the report, tell us about coming into your job last October. It had to have been a tough time to take over.
Thank you so much for having me. I actually started in December. And as you can, you get into a company, you really want to be able to have face-to-face conversation and connect. And for an industry where that face-to-face is so important, I would say that this new environment of digital has done two things. One, I was able to reach so many more people across the board. We're in 100 countries. We serve 500,000 salons. I was able to meet people virtually. But what I didn't get is that intimate one-to-one physical relationship, which I'm very hopeful as the economies open up, I will be able to do that.
Well, and it's interesting. Well, do you feel like it's getting better? I mean, do you see, what's the visibility you have? Do you see the world kind of opening up? It certainly feels that way, but we also know that we're doing it cautiously because we are certainly not out of the pandemic, at least not yet.
I think, Carol, certain parts of the world is doing better than others. I think we should be really proud of what's happening in the U.S. The UK has done a great job as well, but there are many parts of Europe which people in their 70s still don't have their first shot, and it's really restricted the movement of people. Asia, believe it or not, has done a great job, and then you see spots in Latin America where things are popping up. So I think it really depends, but I think as Americans, we could be really proud of what's happening at home.
Are you hopeful, though? Do you feel like you have more visibility about the second half of the year globally? And you guys are a global company, so I am curious. And I do hear that kind of repeatedly, too, from heads of companies, that Asia has definitely made a lot of progress. And they, of course, were the first among getting globally getting the virus to begin with. So they're kind of ahead of us in terms of the timetable. But I do wonder, what kind of visibility you feel like you've got at this point.
We are really fortunate in having what we are seeing is, the industry, the beauty industry has been significantly impacted. In fact, closure, probably permanent closure of salons around 20% across the globe.
Wow.
And what we're seeing, though, is as the business comes back, customers are lining up and going back in. I'll give you specific examples. The salons are going to reopen shortly in the UK. They're booked out until almost 4 months in.
Wow.
Germany reopened at the beginning of March. And because of the capacity constraints, we had hairdressers and stylists starting to schedule 8 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night to service their customers. So definitely people are very excited to get back in the chair and see their colorists and their stylists. That's the good news.
Yeah, that is definitely the good news. Tell us, though, about, I feel like, the troubling news, and that is this past year we've talked a lot about the inequities that have been, it's not new, but just unearthed for another time, and reminding us of the gaps that we have in society, the racism in society. You guys have done a report specifically, and you looked at gender equity in professional beauty, which I think is a world where women have had a lot of opportunities.
We conducted this report to really better understand the state of the professional services industry. And in beauty, you are right. 89% of people in this industry are female. The reality is, as we found out, majority of the decision-making are still held by men.
How is that possible? Can I ask you, I'm just like sitting here thinking, how is that possible?
I think that as you look at a lot of the bigger companies, beauty companies, as I look at my peer group, a lot of them are still men. It's Sue, Nabi, Cody, and myself that are women. A lot of them are ran by men today. And I think one of the ways that we could address that is by making sure every opening, every promotion, we have an equal slate.
Right.
A slate that's diverse, people of color, gender, and we always want to make sure it's the best candidate. But if we start with that lens,
right,
people will bubble up.
Annie, hang on for a second. I got to do some news, but we're going to come back and continue. We'll come back with Annie Young-Scrivener in just a moment of Wella. Let's head out to D.C. and Nancy Lyons for Check on World and National News. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama voted against unionizing. It's a setback for labor organizers who are hoping the union push, if successful in Alabama, might spread nationwide. AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka tells Bloomberg Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos did not play fair on this one.
He makes more in a minute than they make in 2 or 3 years. And yet he spent millions to prevent them from having a voice on the job.
Trumka says the workers were bullied by management. The election was not a close one. Of the more than 3,000 ballots cast, those opposed to the union idea tallied nearly 1,800 votes. Those in favor gained 738. Under pressure to address the imbalance on the Supreme Court, President Biden is signing an executive order to create a study of adding seats to the High Court. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki.
The makeup of this commission, which was vital for the president, there are progressives on the court, there are conservatives on the court. People will present different opinions and different points of view, and then they'll have a report at the end of 180 days.
Psaki says in addition to the size of the court, they'll look at the length of service for justices and the existing rules. The current court has a conservative 6-3 tilt. Two notable deaths today. Britain's Prince Philip, the husband of Queen Elizabeth, died at the age of 99. And a week after suffering a heart attack, rapper DMX has died. He was 50. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate that. Well, this week, Carnival, the largest cruise line operator, reported that bookings are accelerating, reflecting pent-up demand for cruising, even as the industry remains, pretty much on hold. The CDC also came out this week and said that U.S. cruises could resume by midsummer with restrictions. The devil is in the details. Well, our Business Week weekend show features my interview with Carnival CEO Arnold Donald. And in this excerpt, Donald discusses whether vaccines should be mandated for his ship's crews and passengers. Check it out.
Well, first of all, we encourage them. Look, the reality today is vaccines are not accessible to everyone. Young people, children, today vaccines are not recommended for children. And so there's gaps in the vaccine protocol today. There are tests underway. Maybe in a few months, it'll be fine to vaccinate children. Maybe in a few months, there'll be plenty of vaccine available for everyone. Everyone's hoping for that. Everyone's assuming that. And if that comes to pass, we would encourage everyone to be vaccinated. Whether we mandate or not, we have to find, in some places it's illegal to mandate, et cetera. I understand personal choice and personal liberty. We respect all of that. And so we'll follow what the regulations are, wherever it is. But we too want to stand and do the thing that's in the best interest of public health. However, if vaccines are not mandated for other forms of travel and tourism, et cetera, then we're not sure that it makes sense to mandate them.
And that was Carnival CEO Arnold Donald. He is featured in our Bloomberg Business Week radio show. You can hear more of that interview. It is on that weekend radio show, also on our podcast feed at Bloomberg.com. And he really gets into what the CDC has come out and said this week. But a lot of details still yet to be known. He did also talk about some of the cruise lines. They have 9 different cruise lines, those that are up and operating over in Europe, and what has been the results of that and how they have dealt with COVID cases when they do break out. So do check out our Business Week, Bloomberg Business Week radio show on the weekend. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, our daily show, right here on Bloomberg Radio.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Tape. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Longest weekly rally since October, 3 in a row for the S&P 500 index, ending the week at a record 4128. First close ever above 4100. S&P up 31 today, up by 0.8% on the week. The S&P was up 2.7%. The Dow advanced 297 points today, up 0.9%, bringing its year-to-date gain now to 10.4%. NASDAQ up 70 today, higher by 0.5%. Another record as investors shrugged off concern over inflation and focused on prospects for an economic rebound. Treasuries fell, the dollar advanced, 10-year yield 1.66%. Gold down 0.7%, 17.43 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.4%, 59.39 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. I want to get right back to our guests. We're talking with Wella Company CEO Annie Young-Scrivener. She is on the phone from the West Coast. And Annie, we were talking about the report that you guys did, the gender equity report from Wella. We were talking about kind of ironic, but kind of sad that, you know, in particular, there's so many women in the professional beauty business, and yet the senior positions seem to be still dominated by men. You've been in this industry, you've been in the consumer product industry for many years. What is it that still continues to hold women back, especially from the senior positions?
I think that, making sure that we have the right slating and to make sure that we have development programs where we're pulling women, and also people of color forward is going to be really critical. When you're diverse, gender-wise or ethnicity, you never want to get the job because of your color or your gender. You want to make sure that you're the best. I think that is a big role. I think the second piece for women is, particularly during the pandemic, you saw women fall back, and it's because when kids are not in school, they're at home, we're still a majority of the caretakers. So making sure that we have the flexibility in organization is not only going to help women, it's also going to help men. So I think those are really critical. The last thing I would say is education. Making sure that every organization continues to invest in education, whether it's leadership development classes. For our industry, we have really looked at education critically, and to ensure that during the pandemic, we were also making sure that we were giving lessons to our clients, to our partners, so that they could elevate their skill set. I think those would be really key.
I'm looking at some of the stats from the research you guys did. I know you mentioned some earlier, but 44% of beauty professionals closing their salons during the pandemic. I totally get that. 3 out of 10 borrowed money. 1 out of 7 cut back on work to take care of their kids or family. How nervous or concerned are you, or worried about, that some of this continues on the other side of the pandemic? It's not so easy to kind of start up again.
Yeah, some people are hit pretty hard, and I think it's actually some of the larger companies that will start to scale back on how many salons that they have. I think the vibrancy and the entrepreneurial spirit of the small business owner, what we see is they're adjusting. And I think many have migrated working for someone to become independent, because what it allows them to do is to have the freedom to choose which hours, which day. And I think the evolution of the professional beauty industry is going to shift. And the U.S. is actually ahead of the curve. You'll see more independent. You'll see salon suites. We see it in the U.S., we see it in the U.K., and it's now migrating throughout Europe. So I think the industry will adjust and change. And technology definitely is in every industry. It's almost the DNA on how you connect with your clients, how you advertise your services, and we're really investing to help all of our salon owners and stylists do that as well. In fact, we have our largest education training coming up. This is the first time, because it's such a physical world. We're going to do it digitally. We have like 24,000 people signed up for our education course, and we're waiving the fee so that we could ensure that we could help the industry, which is very exciting. It's coming up this month.
One thing I want to ask you, and this is a conversation I'm increasingly having as we talk about the importance of D&I, diversity and inclusion. And yet I recently had someone on who was creating a SPAC and it was all women. And I said, well, wait a minute. We've shown that diversity is what really propels the top and bottom line. That's where you get the most, out of a company where you have mixture of thought, men and women, people from all different kinds of backgrounds. How do you approach that at your company? I know in this research that you say in just the 3 months since the company was formed on December 1st, 2020, 70% of your new hires have been women. I applaud you, but I do wonder, how do you balance the importance of making sure women are hired and seen and given, opportunities to advance, but also making sure you balance it with diversity of thought among your employee base?
It's a great question. I always start with the consumer. I think that any company that is consumer-centric will win because you'll understand their needs and you'll create the right innovation and services. And the reality is 85% of purchasing power is still held by women. We are in an industry that we serve mostly women. Men are also important. And at the end of the day, what you want is you want that diversity and you want people to think differently so that you don't have the same blind spot. And for us, what we look at is a very diverse slate. And then the best candidate, you have to choose the best candidate. You can't say, I'm going to pick that person because they're a woman. So I do think that was the right question that you asked at SPAC on why would you want someone all the same? For us, we look at a diverse slate and the best person rises. And I think that goes to all levels of the organization. It starts at the leadership team, the board, and throughout. And there are certain areas, whether it's technology, engineering, maybe it's in the plant, that you have to work harder. People are out there. It starts with the slate. Yep.
Hey, listen, while we have you, just have about a minute and a half or so, or about a minute left here. You understand the consumer area. You were CEO of Godiva. You had held senior positions at Starbucks. You started at PepsiCo. Were there for many years. You've been on the boards of Tiffany, Yum Brands. You were on Macy's board. From that vantage point, what do you see as the outlook for businesses overall, the consumer, the economy in the U.S. and globally? And just got about a minute or so.
Look, I think that digital is changing the world. And every company had a goal for digital transformation. They've already hit it, 5 years. So I think we have to stay very focused. And I think we have to look at trends. What's happening in Asia that's going to migrate to here? What's happening here, migrate to different areas. And I think being very focused on the innovation needs of your consumer will help you win.
What keeps you up at night, just quickly?
I think making sure that we focus. For my organization, there's so many opportunities. Focusing, aligning the organization, and make sure that our actions also positively impact the community and the planet. It's going to be critical.
Okay, going to leave it on that note, and hopefully we can check in with you as the year progresses. Anna Young-Scrivener, she's Chief Executive Officer at Wella Company, joining us on the phone from the West Coast. Just a reminder of how we finished up the week. We had quite a rally in those major equity averages. For the week overall, up nearly 2% on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, up 2.7% on the S&P, and on the NASDAQ, a gain of more than 3%. Bloomberg Business Week, we've got a huge team. My thanks to everybody this week. From all of us and Tim Stenovic, have a great and safe weekend. I'm Carol Masser, and this is Bloomberg Radio.